When she broke his gate at sunrise, she never expected him to save her. At sunrise, Clara Whitcomb rode onto Jonah Reed's land with a shotgun across her lap, 37 starving cattle behind her, and a fear in her chest that was stronger than pride. The whole Red Willow Valley had been waiting for the Whitcomb place to fail. Some watched from behind curtains. Some talked low in the mercantile. Some said a woman had no business holding a ranch together after her father was gone. But Clara had held it together through a hard winter, a dry spring, and the cruelest summer New Mexico territory had seen in years. By August of 1889, the ground around her ranch had cracked open like old pottery. The grass had turned silver and brittle. The wind carried dust instead of rain. Every morning, Clara walked among her cattle and counted the ribs showing through their hides. Every evening, she came back to the house with dust on her boots and silence in her mouth. There was water in the valley. Everyone knew where. It came from a spring tucked below a line of cottonwoods on Reed land, just beyond the old stone boundary. Clear water, cold water, water that had never failed, not even in the dry years. And for 17 years, no Whitcomb had crossed onto Reed land except with anger in his hand. Clara's father, Caleb Whitcomb, had hated the Reeds until the day he died. He had told Clara that Nathaniel Reed stole water, honor, and peace from their family. He had made her swear beside his sickbed that she would never beg from a Reed, never trust a Reed, and never let that family see her bend. Clara had kept that promise as long as she could. Then one of her calves dropped beside the dry trough and did not rise again. That night Clara sat at the kitchen table while the lantern flame trembled in the hot wind sneaking through the wall cracks. Her father's old Bible lay shut beside her. His pocket watch sat near her hand, stopped at the hour he died. Across the room, a letter was tucked behind a loose brick near the stove, a letter her mother had hidden years ago and Clara had never dared to open twice. She looked at the watch for a long time. Then she whispered, "Forgive me, Pa." Before dawn, she saddled her mare, Mercy, with hands that would not stay steady. She loaded her father's shotgun, not because she wanted to use it, but because the valley would expect a Whitcomb woman to come ready for war. She cut the rusted wire at the old boundary, pulled the gate chain loose, and drove her cattle toward the only living water left. The spring steamed faintly in the cool morning air when the cattle reached it. They pushed forward, thirsty and weak, their hooves slipping in the damp mud. Clara sat on Mercy beneath the cottonwoods, the shotgun resting across her knees, her jaw tight enough to ache. She knew Jonah Reed would come. Every Reed man had guarded that spring like it was gold in the ground. Jonah came just after the sun lifted over the mesa. He rode a dark bay horse with no hurry in him. That was the first thing Clara noticed. He did not come charging with a rifle raised. He did not shout from the hill. He rode down slow, his hat low, his coat faded at the cuffs, his face shadowed by many mornings spent alone. He stopped near the broken gate and looked at the cut chain hanging from the post. Then he looked at the cattle drinking from his spring. Then he looked at Clara. "You broke my gate," he said. His voice was quiet, and somehow that made Clara's grip tighten. "My cattle were dying," she said. "I will pay for the chain when I can. I will pay for the water when I can, but they drink today." Jonah's horse shifted under him. A breeze moved through the cottonwood leaves. Somewhere behind Clara, a cow coughed and lowered its head again to drink. Jonah looked at the shotgun across her lap. "You planning to shoot me over water, Miss Whitcomb?" Clara swallowed. Her mouth felt full of dust. "I am planning to keep them alive." For a moment, neither of them moved. All the years of old anger seemed to stand between them, thick as smoke. Clara could almost hear her father's voice telling her not to lower her eyes. She could almost see the men in town shaking their heads, waiting to say she had finally brought ruin on herself. Jonah dismounted. Clara lifted the shotgun an inch. He noticed, but he did not step back. He walked to the gate post, bent down, and picked up the broken chain. He turned it in his hands like he was studying something sad instead of something stolen. "My father would have called the sheriff," Jonah said. Clara's throat tightened. "Then call him." Jonah looked toward the spring. The cattle drank like they had reached heaven by mistake. "My father is dead," he said, "and I am tired of obeying a dead man's anger." Clara did not know what to say. Jonah walked to his saddle, pulled a coil of rope free, and tied the broken gate open instead of shut. The small sound of rope tightening around wood seemed louder than a gunshot. Clara stared at him. "What are you doing?" "Making room," he said. "For what?" "For thirsty animals, for sense, maybe for something our fathers never had." His words struck her harder than anger would have. She had come ready to fight. She had not come ready to be spared. Jonah lifted his hat and wiped his brow with his sleeve. There was dust on his cheek and a tiredness around his eyes that did not look like weakness. It looked like a man who had carried a weight too long and had finally set one corner of it down. "The spring runs strong," he said. "Your herd can water in the morning. Mine can come at noon. We will keep them separated enough to avoid trouble." Clara's voice came out sharp because softness would have broken her. "Why would you do that?" Jonah looked at her then, truly looked at her. Not like she was a Whitcomb, not like she was the daughter of his father's enemy, but like she was a woman sitting on a tired horse with fear hidden behind a hard face. "Because last week I found one of my steers dead 50 steps from water," he said. "And I thought any man who lets a creature die that close to help just to honor an old quarrel is no man worth becoming." Clara lowered the shotgun. She did it slowly, almost against her own will. For the first time in her life, she stood on Reed land without feeling only hate. She felt shame, relief, suspicion, and something far more dangerous than any of those. "Hope." Jonah mounted again and gathered his reins. "I will mend the wire by sundown," Clara said. "Do not mend it all," Jonah answered. "Leave a passage. Drought is not finished with this valley." Then he rode away. Clara watched him cross the slope toward his ranch house, growing smaller in the pale gold light. Behind her, the cattle drank. Before her, the tied-open gate moved softly in the wind. And in that quiet moment, Clara understood something that frightened her more than Jonah Reed ever had. She had not only broken his gate. She had opened a way into a life her father had warned her never to imagine. For 3 days, Clara Whitcomb told herself that Jonah Reed's kindness meant nothing. It was water, nothing more. A dry summer had pushed 2 enemies to the same spring, and a practical man had made a practical choice. That was all. She repeated it while hauling feed, while mending harness leather, while washing dust from her face at the basin each night. She repeated it when the house settled in the dark and her father's stopped pocket watch stared at her from the table like an eye that still judged. But every morning, before the sun climbed high enough to burn the shadows away, Clara rode to the open gate. And every morning, Jonah was already there. He never crowded her. He never acted proud about what he had done. He stood near the cottonwoods with his sleeves rolled, watching the cattle drink and making sure his own herd stayed back until their turn. Sometimes he brought tools. Sometimes he patched the trough boards near the spring. Sometimes he only stood with one hand resting on his saddle horn, quiet as the stones. The first mornings were stiff. "Your herd looks stronger," he said on the 4th day. "They are standing longer," Clara answered. "That old brindle cow of yours still limps." She was limping before the drought. Jonah nodded, and the conversation died. A meadowlark sang somewhere in the dry grass. Clara hated how aware she was of the silence between them. It was not empty. It was full of all the things they were not saying. On the fifth morning, she found him kneeling beside the spring, clearing leaves and mud from the runoff channel with a short-handled shovel. His hat lay on the ground beside him. His dark hair was damp at the temples, and mud clung to one knee of his trousers. "You do not have to tend it for my cattle," Clara said. Jonah did not look up. "I am tending it for the spring." That sounds like something a man says when he does not want thanks. He glanced at her then, and the corner of his mouth almost moved. "Maybe I am not much practiced at receiving it." Clara sat straighter in the saddle. "Neither am I at giving it." That time he did smile, but only faintly. It troubled her more than it should have. By the end of the week, the valley had begun to notice. Old Mrs. Bell from the stage road saw Clara driving cattle through Reed's gate and nearly tipped backward in her wagon from staring. Two boys from the livery road passed the boundary ridge and came back to town with their eyes wide and their mouths full of news. By Saturday evening, every table at the Red Lantern Saloon had an opinion. Clara heard it when she went for flour and coffee. The mercantile bell rang above her head, and the talking stopped so fast it felt like a door slamming. Mr. Haskins, the storekeeper, busied himself with a crate of canned peaches. A woman near the ribbon shelf turned her back. At the counter, Amos Vale, who had ridden with her father years before, leaned on one elbow and looked at Clara like he had found rot in good timber. "So it is true," Amos said. Clara placed her flour sack on the counter. "Depends on what lie you heard. I heard you cut Reed's gate, and now his spring waters your cattle." "That much is true." "And he let you?" Clara met his eyes. "He did." Amos gave a dry laugh. "Your father would have sooner swallowed a coal." "My father is not here to haul water," Clara said. The room grew colder than it had any right to be in August. Amos stepped closer. He was a wide man with a gray beard and a red face, the kind who mistook loudness for honor. "Clara Whitcomb trusted you to keep his name clean." Clara's fingers tightened around the neck of the flour sack. "My father trusted me to keep his ranch alive." "With Reed help." "With water." "Same thing these days." She wanted to answer hard. She wanted to cut him down in front of everyone and leave with her pride sharp and shining. But a picture rose in her mind before she could speak. Jonah tying open the gate, saying he was tired of obeying a dead man's anger. So Clara only paid for her goods. When she reached the door, Amos spoke again behind her. "Careful, Clara. A Reed does not open a gate unless he means to close a trap." She left without turning around, but the words followed her home. That night wind scraped against the ranch house like fingernails. Clara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold in front of her. The flour was stored. The cattle were bedded down. The shotgun was back above the door. Still, she could not settle. A trap. She did not believe Jonah's kindness had been false, not when she remembered his face at the spring. But believing a Reed was dangerous. It went against every lesson carved into her since childhood. At last she stood and crossed to the stove. Behind it one brick sat loose. Clara had found it when she was 12, after her mother died. Inside was a folded letter wrapped in faded blue ribbon. She had read only the first line back then, seen her mother's handwriting, and pushed it away as if grief itself had burned her hand. Now she pried the brick free again. Dust fell across the floor. Her fingers found the ribbon. The paper was dry and soft, worn thin where it had been folded. She carried it to the table and held it under the lantern. On the outside, in her mother's careful hand, were 3 words. "For my Clara." Her chest tightened. She opened it. "My sweet girl, if you are reading this, then the men of this valley have likely taught you the shape of hate better than the shape of truth." Clara stopped breathing for a moment. Outside, a horse shifted in the lean-to. The lantern flame bent in the draft. She read the next line slowly, her hand trembling more with every word. Your father was not always the man he became. Nathaniel Reed was not always his enemy. There was a time when the two ranches shared more than a fence. There was a time when water was not the first thing taken from us. Clara lowered the letter. The room seemed to tilt. For 17 years, she had believed the feud began and ended with a spring, a creek, and two stubborn men. But her mother's hidden words said there had been something before the water, something buried deeper. She looked toward the dark window, past her own reflection, past the yard, toward the unseen line of reed land. And for the first time, Clara wondered whether the gate she had broken was not the oldest thing standing between them. Clara did not finish the letter that night. She folded it with careful fingers, tied the faded blue ribbon around it again, and set it beside her father's watch as if both objects had become too heavy to touch. For a long while, she sat in the dim kitchen, listening to the wind push dust against the window glass. Her mother had been gentle in Clara's memory, soft hands, a quiet voice, a woman who sang while kneading bread even when there was little flour left. Clara had never thought of her as someone who hid secrets behind stove bricks. But there it was, a secret in blue ribbon. By morning, Clara's eyes felt raw from too little sleep. Still, she rose before dawn, tied her hair at the back of her neck, and walked out to the corral. The air smelled of dry sage and old dust. Mercy lifted her head from the fence rail, blinking at her. "You know better than I do," Clara murmured, rubbing the mare's nose. "Horses never swear loyalty to dead men." She saddled up and drove the cattle toward Reed land. The open gate waited in the pale morning. Jonah had tied it well. The rope held firm but not tight. It allowed the gate to shift a little in the wind, as if it were breathing. Jonah stood near the spring, speaking low to one of his hands, a young rider named Ben who kept looking at Clara as if she might set fire to the whole pasture. When Clara approached, Ben touched his hat quickly and rode off with the Reed herd. Jonah watched him go, then looked back at her. "Town bothering you yet?" he asked. Clara climbed down from the saddle. "You ask like you already know." "I bought nails yesterday. Haskins sold them like he was handing me evidence for a trial." Despite herself, Clara gave a faint laugh. It surprised her, that small sound. It had been days since anything in her chest had loosened enough for laughter. Jonah heard it too. His expression changed just slightly, like a man seeing sun through a storm cloud. Then Clara remembered the letter, and the lightness passed. "Did your father ever speak of my mother?" she asked. Jonah went still. It was not a large movement. He did not step back or look away, but something closed in his face, the way shutters close before bad weather. "Evelyn Whitcomb," he said. Clara nodded. "Not much." "That means some." Jonah looked down at the spring. The water moved clear over pale stones. A leaf drifted past and caught for a moment against a root. "My father had a way of not speaking that told more than words," he said. "When your mother's name came up, he left the room." Clara felt her stomach tighten. "Why?" "I do not know." "Did he hate her?" "No," Jonah said, and this time he answered too quickly. "No, I do not think so." Clara studied him. "Then what did he feel?" Jonah's hand moved to the brim of his hat, then fell away again. "Regret, maybe." The word settled between them. Regret. It sounded different from hatred, quieter, older, harder to bury. Clara almost told him about the letter then. She almost reached into the inside pocket of her coat and pulled it free. But her father's voice rose sharp in her memory, warning her that a Whitcomb did not hand family sorrow to a Reed. So she swallowed the truth. "My mother died when I was 12, she said instead. "Fever took her in 3 nights. Pa never spoke much after that except to give orders." My mother died young too, Jonah said. I was 10. She planted peach trees the year before, said a house without fruit near it seemed too lonely. Clara looked at him. That why you keep the orchard? His eyes softened toward the hill where his ranch house stood hidden beyond the ridge. I keep it because every spring it blooms, and for a week or two, the place looks like she might come walking back through it. Clara did not answer. She could not. A pain that gentle was harder to stand near than anger. Behind them, the cattle drank. A calf bumped its head against its mother's flank. The sun lifted over the dry land, laying gold across Jonah's shoulders. For the first time, Clara wondered what grief had done to him. Not the feud, not the rumors, not the Reed name. Him. A rider appeared on the ridge before either of them could speak again. He came fast, hard enough that his horse threw dust in a long brown tail behind him. Clara recognized the shape before the man reached the spring. Sila's crow. He ran cattle on the southern flats and had hated both Whitcombs and Reeds when it suited him, though he smiled in church like a man with clean hands. Sila's had offered to buy Clara's ranch twice after her father died. The second time, he had said a woman alone ought to take a fair offer before the bank took everything. Clara had shut the door in his face. Now Sila's rode straight toward the spring, pulled his horse short, and let his eyes move from Clara to Jonah to the mingled tracks around the water. Well, Silas said, smiling without warmth, I guess the whole valley was not lying. Jonah's voice stayed calm. Morning, Crow. Morning, Silas laughed. That all you have to say? A Whitcomb herd drinking Reed water and the two of you standing here like old friends. Clara stepped toward Mercy. This is none of your concern. Water in Red Willow is everyone's concern. No, Jonah said, this spring is mine. Silas looked at him. That right. Your father used to understand that letting one person cross a line invites every hungry neighbor to do the same. My father understood many things poorly. The smile faded from Silas's face. Clara felt the danger shift. Not toward guns, not yet, but toward something slyer. Something that would move through town, through lawyers, through old documents and whispered threats. Silas leaned forward in the saddle. Folks are saying Reed land is open now. Folks are saying maybe that spring was never yours alone. Maybe it is time a judge looked again. Jonah's jaw tightened. Clara understood then. Silas did not care about the feud. He cared about water, land, and weakness. If Clara and Jonah looked divided, he would use that. If they looked united, he would use that too. Ride on, Silas, Clara said. He tipped his hat. Gladly, but you both might want to remember something. Old wars do not end just because two lonely people get soft by a spring. He turned his horse and rode away, leaving dust hanging behind him. Clara stood frozen until the hoofbeats faded. Jonah looked at her. He has been waiting for trouble. He has been waiting for my ranch, Clara said. And maybe mine. The spring no longer felt peaceful. The cottonwoods moved above them, but their leaves sounded like whispers now. Clara touched the hidden letter inside her coat. Her mother's secret pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because sometimes the first act of mercy is only the beginning of the danger. Jonah noticed the movement of her hand. What are you carrying? He asked softly. Clara looked at him, and for one breath she almost trusted him with everything. Then a gunshot cracked from the far ridge. Mercy reared, the cattle scattered, and Jonah grabbed Clara by the arm, pulling her down behind the old stone trough, just as dust jumped from the ground where she had been standing. Jonah's hand closed around Clara's arm with such force that she felt his fear before she understood her own. Stay down, he said. The words were low, sharp, and close to her ear. Clara crouched behind the old stone trough, her shoulder pressed against his coat, her breath caught somewhere high in her chest. A second shot did not come. That almost made it worse. The whole valley seemed to hold still, waiting. The cattle bawled and pushed away from the spring in a frightened wave. Mercy danced near the cottonwoods, reins dragging, eyes wide and white. Jonah's bay horse stamped and pulled against the brush where he had tied it. Clara reached for the shotgun, still hanging from Mercy's saddle. Jonah caught her wrist. No. Someone shot at us. Or shot near us to make sure we knew he could. Clara stared at him. That does not comfort me. It was not meant to. He lifted his head just enough to look over the broken edge of the trough. Clara watched his face. There was no panic in it, only focus, and beneath that, a quiet anger that seemed colder than shouting ever could. "North Ridge," he said, "near the 2 junipers." Clara looked before he could stop her. The ridge lay empty now, only dry grass and pale stone under a hard blue sky. Whoever had fired had already vanished. "Sila's," she whispered. "Maybe." "You heard him. He as good as warned us." Jonah lowered back beside her. Crow likes fear, but he likes witnesses too. Shooting at us in open daylight is a risk. So is letting us join hands over water. Jonah looked at her then. The words had come out before Clara could stop them. Join hands. She had not meant it the way it sounded, but the silence after it made her cheeks warm despite the danger around them. Jonah did not smile. Instead, his gaze dropped to where his hand still held her wrist. He let go slowly. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "Sure?" I said no. But her voice shook, and she hated that he heard it. Jonah rose first, keeping low, and moved toward Mercy. The mare tossed her head, but he spoke softly until she stilled enough for him to catch the reins. Clara watched him run one hand along the horse's neck with a gentleness that did not match the hard line of his jaw. He brought Mercy back to her. "Ride home," he said. Clara took the reins. "And leave you here. I need to find the casing if there is one. Look for tracks before the wind takes them." "I can track." "I know." "Then do not speak to me like I am some child hiding under a bed." Jonah exhaled through his nose and looked toward the ridge again. "I am speaking to you like someone just fired a rifle close enough to throw dust at your skirt. And I am speaking to you like someone who has had men trying to scare her off land for 2 years. That stopped him. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Jonah had seen Clara angry. He had seen her proud. But now he seemed to see the tired layer beneath it, the one she kept buried under work and sharp words. "You should have told me," he said. "You were a Reed." "I am Jonah." The answer struck her with its plainness. Not Mr. Reed, not the enemy, not a family name tied to old poison. "Jonah." Clara's fingers tightened in Mercy's mane. Before she could answer, Ben came galloping from the lower pasture with 2 Reed riders behind him. His young face was pale beneath the dust. "Mr. Reed," he called, pulling up hard. "We heard the shot." "One shot," Jonah said. "North Ridge. Take Tom and circle wide. Do not chase anybody, look for tracks. If you see Crow or any of his men, you come back and tell me. You do not play hero." Ben nodded quickly and rode off. Clara mounted, but she did not leave. She guided Mercy beside Jonah as he walked toward the ridge. He gave her one tired look. "I thought I told you to ride home." "You said it, I did not agree." His mouth tightened, but he did not argue again. They climbed the slope together. The sun had grown hotter, pressing down on their hats and shoulders. Dust stuck to the sweat at Clara's neck. Every small sound seemed too loud. The creak of leather, the dry snap of grass under hooves, the distant lowing of scattered cattle. Near the 2 junipers, Jonah found where a horse had stood. The tracks were plain in a patch of softer dirt. One horse shod unevenly. A rider had waited there, half hidden by brush. Clara climbed down and knelt beside Jonah. He pointed at the ground. "See that mark?" "A broken shoe," Clara said. "Back left." She nodded. "Crow's gray gelding carries a bad shoe. I saw it outside the mercantile last week." Jonah looked toward the south, where Crow's land lay beyond the flats. "That is not proof enough for a sheriff," he said. "No, but it is enough for me." A small white scrap fluttered against a thorn bush a few feet away. Clara reached for it, but Jonah got there first. He pulled it free and turned it over in his hand. It was not paper. It was cloth, torn from a feed sack, with a few words written in black pencil. "Leave the spring closed, or lose more than cattle." Clara read it twice. Her fear did not rise wild this time. It went still, deep, cold. Jonah folded the cloth and tucked it into his vest. "That is a threat to both of us," he said. "No," Clara answered. "It is a warning to me." "You do not know that. I know men like Silas Crow. He tried to buy my ranch when Pa was barely buried. When I refused, my fences started breaking. My grain went missing. My hired hands were offered better pay elsewhere. Then the bank began asking questions it had never asked before." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Why did you not tell the sheriff?" "And say what? That bad luck wears Silas Crow's boots." The wind moved over the ridge. For the first time since the shot, Clara looked small to Jonah, not weak, but worn down by a fight she had been forced to carry alone. He removed his hat and wiped the dust from its brim. "You will not carry this alone now," he said. Clara looked away because the promise in his voice frightened her more than the threat. Promises had always been chains in her life. Her father's promise, her mother's silence, the valley's expectations. Now Jonah offered one that sounded like shelter, and she did not know whether to step beneath it. A rider appeared below them. It was not Ben. It was Amos Vale, pushing his horse hard from the direction of town. Clara stiffened as he rode up the slope, red-faced and breathing heavy. "I came as soon as I heard," Amos said, looking between them. "Folks in town are saying a shot was fired near the spring." "News travels fast for something that happened moments ago," Jonah said. Amos ignored him and turned to Clara. "You need to come home, now." Clara's brows drew together. "My home is not your command." Amos leaned closer. His voice dropped, but Jonah still heard every word. "Your father left more than land behind, Clara. He left papers. Papers that can ruin you if the wrong man finds them." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The letter in her coat seemed to burn against her heart. "What papers?" she asked. Amos looked toward Jonah with open hatred. "Not in front of him," he said. Jonah's face hardened. Clara did not move. And suddenly, she knew that her mother's hidden letter was only one piece of a truth that far too many men had spent years trying to keep buried. Amos Vale sat his horse like a man who had ridden out to collect Clara, not warn her. The sun was high now, bright enough to turn the stones white along the ridge. Below them, the spring shone between the cottonwoods as if nothing had happened there. The cattle had begun to gather again, slow and nervous, drawn back by thirst stronger than fear. Clara kept one hand near Mercy's reins and the other pressed lightly against her coat, where her mother's letter rested. "What papers?" she asked again. Amos's eyes shifted to Jonah. "I said not in front of him." Jonah did not move, but his voice cut clean through the dry air. "A shot was fired near my spring. A threat was left on my land. If there are papers tied to that, I will hear it." "You will hear nothing," Amos snapped. "This is Whitcomb business." Clara turned on him. "Then speak to the Whitcomb standing in front of you." Amos looked at her, and for a moment his hard face softened. Not with kindness, but with something that looked almost like pity. It made Clara colder than his anger had. "Your father trusted me," he said. "My father trusted too many men who liked speaking for him after he died." His jaw tightened. Caleb knew the old fight was bigger than water. The words seemed to pull the wind from the ridge. Jonah looked at Clara. She did not look back. Her eyes stayed on Amos. "What do you know about my mother?" she asked. Amos's hand twitched on his reins. That was answer enough. Clara stepped closer. "What do you know?" Amos leaned down in the saddle. "I know your mother was a good woman who should have burned what she wrote instead of hiding it." The ridge grew silent. Jonah's face changed then, not with surprise but with understanding. "You knew about the letter." Amos gave him a sharp look. "I knew enough to protect Caleb's daughter from mistakes." Clara laughed once, a dry sound that held no joy. "Protect me. You let me live under a lie. I let you keep your ranch. My ranch is falling apart around me because men like you keep deciding what truth I am allowed to know." Amos's face flushed. "You think truth is soft. Truth ruins families, girl. It splits graves open. Your father spent half his life trying to bury what your mother could not forget." Clara felt her heart beating hard. Then maybe it is time the grave opened. Amos shook his head. "You sound just like her." For some reason, that hurt and healed at the same time. Jonah took a step forward. "What did Evelyn Whitcomb write?" Amos's eyes narrowed. "Ask your own house, Reed. Ask what your father kept locked in that desk of his. The two of them carried the same sin from opposite sides." Jonah went still. Clara saw it. A small shift in his eyes, like a door opening in a room he thought he knew. "My father's desk is locked," he said slowly. "Then break it," Amos said. "Maybe then you will understand why your name has no place beside hers." He turned his horse as if to leave, but Clara caught the bridle. "No." The animal tossed its head. Amos looked down at her hand with anger rising. "Let go. Not until you answer me. I gave your father my word. My father is dead. And his shame should be too." Clara's grip tightened. "Was my mother ashamed?" Amos did not answer. That silence told Clara more than any shouting could have. Her mother had not hidden the letter because of shame. She had hidden it because someone had made truth unsafe. A hoofbeat sounded below. Ben and the other Reed riders were coming back from the far side of the ridge. Amos saw them, cursed under his breath, and jerked his horse free. "This road ends badly," he said, "for both of you. Crow is not the only man in this valley who wants old lines left standing." Then he rode away toward town, dust rising behind him. Clara watched until he vanished beyond the slope. Jonah spoke first. He was scared. Amos Vale has never been scared of anything. He was today. Clara turned toward him. Her anger had burned so hot that now she felt hollow, weak in the knees. The hidden letter seemed heavier with every breath. "My mother wrote that the feud was not only about water," she said. Jonah's eyes held hers. "My father may have kept something too." She nodded. "Then we find it. Together." The word waited between them. Together was dangerous. Together meant more than shared water. It meant opening doors neither family wanted opened. It meant standing in front of town, not as Reed and Whitcomb, but as two people refusing to carry old poison any farther. Clara looked down at her hand. Dust clung to her knuckles. Her fingers were still trembling from the shot, from Amos, from the truth pressing close. "I do not know how to trust you," she said. Jonah's voice softened. "I do not know how to ask you to." That answer nearly broke her. Not because it was grand. It was not. It was plain and honest, and Clara had heard so little plain honesty in her life that it felt like water after thirst. She drew the folded letter from her coat. Jonah looked at it but did not reach for it. "My mother hid this behind the stove," Clara said. "I have not read all of it." "Why not?" "Because once I do, I cannot go back to not knowing." A slow wind moved over them. Down by the spring a calf called for its mother. The sound was small and lost, but the mother answered. Jonah removed his hat. "My father's desk sits in the back room of my house," he said. "I have not opened it since he died. He kept the key around his neck until the end. After the burial, it disappeared." "Who buried him?" "Me, Ben, and Amos Vale." Clara's eyes lifted. Jonah understood at the same moment she did. Amos had not come only to warn them. He had come because he knew what still existed, and he feared both halves of the truth being brought into the light. If you believe a buried truth can still change the living, stay close to this story, because Clara and Jonah have only found the first edge of it. They rode down from the ridge together, not touching, not speaking. At the spring, Jonah told his men to keep watch and move the herds in separate lines for the day. Clara watered her cattle, but her mind was far from the sound of hooves and splashing water. Near noon, she followed Jonah across reed land. It was the first time she had ridden beyond the spring. The Reed ranch house stood under a slope of tired peach trees, their leaves curled from drought. The porch sagged on one side. A lantern hung by the door even in daylight, swaying gently in the wind. It was not the grand enemy fortress Clara had pictured as a child. It was only a lonely house with too many closed windows. Inside, the air smelled of old wood, dust, and dried fruit. Jonah led her to a back room where a heavy desk sat beneath a sheet. He pulled the cloth away. On the center drawer, deep in the wood, were fresh scratches around the lock. Jonah bent closer. "Someone has already tried to open it," he said. Clara stepped beside him, her mouth dry. Then they both heard it. A faint sound from the front porch. One board creaked. Jonah reached for the rifle by the wall, but before his hand closed around it, a voice called from outside. "Do not shoot, Jonah." Clara knew that voice. Amos Vale stood at the door, holding a small iron key in his hand. Amos Vale stood on the porch with the iron key held between two fingers, as if it were a snake he had finally grown tired of carrying. Jonah kept his hand near the rifle, but did not lift it. Clara stood beside the desk, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Dust hung in the back room where Jonah had pulled the sheet away, and the old wood seemed to watch them all with a silence older than any of them. "You followed us," Jonah said. Amos looked past him to Clara. "I knew where you would go." "How?" Clara asked. "Because your mother's letter was only half the wound." He stepped inside slowly. His boots sounded heavy on the floorboards. For once, the hard anger he always wore in town had slipped. Beneath it was an old man with tired eyes and a face carved by choices he could no longer defend. Jonah held out his hand. "Give me the key." Amos looked at the desk. "Your father gave it to me the night before he died. Said if you ever opened that drawer, you would hate him." "I already buried him," Jonah said. "Let me decide what remains." Amos dropped the key into his palm. The sound of iron against skin was small, but Clara felt it like thunder. Jonah knelt before the desk. His hand did not shake, but it moved slowly, as if turning that key meant turning against his whole childhood. The lock resisted at first. Then it gave with a dull click. Inside the drawer lay a packet of letters tied with black thread, a folded claim map, and a small silver locket tarnished almost brown with age. Clara's breath caught. She knew that locket. Not from sight, but from her mother's letter. The second line she had read years ago as a child had spoken of a silver locket lost near the creek, one her mother said held the first promise she ever broke. Jonah lifted it carefully and opened it. Inside were two tiny portraits, faded but clear enough. One was Evelyn Whitcomb. The other was Nathaniel Reed. Clara stepped back as if the floor had shifted under her. "No," she whispered. Jonah stared at the locket, all color gone from his face. Amos removed his hat. Before she married Caleb, Evelyn loved Nathaniel. Before Nathaniel married Jonah's mother, he loved her back. The room seemed to shrink around them. Clara thought of her father's hard voice, his warnings, the way he spat the Reed name like poison. She thought of her mother standing at the window some evenings, looking toward the boundary line with tears she blamed on smoke from the stove. Jonah closed the locket with care. What happened? Amos swallowed. Land happened. Pride happened. Two fathers happened before either of yours. Evelyn's family needed a strong ranch alliance. Caleb Whitcomb had cattle, money, and a name people respected. Nathaniel Reed had water but little else. Evelyn was promised to Caleb before she was old enough to know her own heart. Clara's eyes burned. My mother was traded. She was married as many women were married, Amos said softly. But yes, her heart was elsewhere. Jonah picked up the letters and the feud. Amos turned toward the window. Outside, the peach trees moved in the hot wind. Caleb found one letter after the wedding, not an improper thing, just goodbye. But he was a proud man, and pride can make a fool see theft where there is only grief. He believed Nathaniel had taken something no husband could win back. When the water claim came up, Caleb fought like he was fighting for Evelyn herself. Nathaniel fought because Caleb tried to ruin him. Clara pressed a hand against the desk to steady herself. All her life, she had been told the feud began over water. Now she understood water had only been the excuse men used because heartbreak sounded too weak for courtrooms and saloons. Jonah unfolded the claim map. The paper was old, the ink faded in places, but the markings were plain. The creek line had been drawn differently than Clara had ever seen it. A small note in Nathaniel Reed's hand was written along the edge. Original shared channel. Agreed by EW and NR before dispute. Spring feeds both lower pastures. Jonah read it twice. This says the spring's runoff crossed both properties before the ditch was altered. Amos nodded. Caleb had men change the lower channel after the first court ruling. Nathaniel found out. He planned to go back before the judge. Then Evelyn begged both men to stop before the valley tore itself apart. My mother knew, Clara asked. She knew everything, Amos said, and she carried the blame for peace that never came. Clara took out her mother's letter with numb fingers. This time, she untied the ribbon and opened it fully. Jonah did not move closer. He let her read. My sweet girl, if this truth reaches you, know first that love can be innocent and still cause pain when pride rules the room. I loved Nathaniel Reed before I was made to marry your father. I stayed faithful to my vows, but your father never forgave what came before him. He turned sorrow into war, and Nathaniel answered with his own anger. Water became the name they gave to a wound neither would speak aloud. Clara's eyes blurred. She forced herself to continue. If you ever stand near that spring and feel hatred asking to live through you, do not obey it. The land remembers truth better than men do. The water was never meant to belong to one family alone. Her hand shook so badly the paper rustled. Jonah lowered himself into the chair behind the desk as if his strength had left him. His father had not been innocent. Her father had not been only wronged. Their families had built a wall out of half-truths, and both children had been taught to guard it. Amos spoke quietly. I kept the key because Caleb asked me to. I kept silent because I believed silence protected you. Clara looked at him then, and her grief sharpened into anger. Protected me from what? My mother's heart, my father's pride, or the fact that men in this valley would rather let cattle die than admit they had been worshiping a lie. Amos flinched. Jonah stood and placed the map on the desk. Crow knows something. Amos nodded. He knows enough. His uncle helped dig the altered ditch. Silas has been looking for proof that the old channel fed Whitcomb land. If he can show the spring was mishandled, he will push for county control, then buy rights through men he owns. Clara folded her mother's letter against her chest. So the shot was not just to scare us apart. No, Amos said. It was to keep you from opening this drawer. Outside, a horse gave a sharp cry. Jonah moved first. They ran to the porch just as Ben came tearing into the yard, hat gone, face white with dust. "Mr. Reed," he shouted, "the lower pasture is on fire." Clara turned toward the south. Beyond the ridge, a black ribbon of smoke climbed into the bright sky, rising from the land where reed grass met Whitcomb fence. The smoke rose like a dark warning over the valley. Jonah was already in the saddle before Clara reached Mercy. Ben wheeled his horse around, pointing south with one shaking hand. "It started near the lower fence," Ben said. "Wind's pushing it east. If it crosses the dry wash, it will run straight into Miss Whitcomb's hay field." Clara's stomach dropped. Her hay field was small, poor, and half-dry, but it was all she had to carry her cattle through the coming winter. Without it, the spring would not matter. Water could not save animals with nothing to eat. Jonah looked at his men. "Get every rider, bring shovels, wet sacks, and the water wagon, move fast." Then he turned to Clara, "Ride with me." She did not need telling twice. They flew across reed land, hooves beating hard over dust and stone. Amos followed behind them, slower but determined, the old key still clutched in one hand until he shoved it into his vest. Clara's mother's letter was tucked inside her coat, close to her heart, and with every stride of Mercy's gallop, the paper seemed to strike against her ribs. The fire showed itself when they crested the ridge. It crawled low through the dry grass, orange tongues snapping at brush and fence posts. The wind pulled smoke across the pasture in gray sheets. It was not a great wall of flame yet, but it was hungry, and everything around it had been waiting months to burn. Clara saw the place where it had started. Near the old boundary. Near the passage Jonah had left open. For one terrible second she understood how the town would tell it. Clara Whitcomb crossed reed land and now reed pasture burned. Or Jonah Reed opened his spring and Whitcomb trouble came through the gate. The old hate would not even need proof. It would only need smoke. Jonah pulled his horse hard beside the fire line. "Ben, take 2 men and cut the fence before the cattle bunch against it. Tom, get the water wagon to the wash. Clara, can your hands come from the north field?" "They will if they see smoke." "Good, we stop it before it reaches your hay." The words were simple, but they steadied her. They worked without another breath wasted. Clara tied a wet bandana over her mouth and took a shovel. Jonah worked a few yards away, beating flames back from a line of dry brush. Sparks jumped at his sleeves. Smoke made his eyes red. Still he moved with calm purpose, calling orders only when needed. Soon riders came from both ranches. Whitcomb men and Reed men, who would have crossed the street to avoid each other a week before, now stood shoulder to shoulder in choking smoke, scraping dirt over flame, dragging brush away, and swinging wet sacks until their arms shook. Nobody asked whose land burned. Nobody asked whose cattle would suffer. For one hard hour, the only enemy was fire. Clara saw young Ben stumble near a smoking fence post. A Whitcomb hand named Luke caught him by the collar and pulled him back before the post fell. Ben looked at him with surprise, then nodded once. Luke nodded back. That was all, but Clara saw it, and something in her chest twisted. Maybe old wars ended first in small gestures nobody praised. The wind shifted near midday. The fire turned toward the wash, exactly as Ben had feared. If it crossed, it would race downhill into Clara's hay. Jonah saw it at the same moment she did. "We need a break line," he shouted. "There is no time," Clara answered. Jonah pointed toward a narrow strip of cattle-trampled ground along the old ditch. "There, we widen it, now." They ran to the ditch with 4 men behind them. The old channel lay half-filled with dirt and dead weeds, the same channel Amos said Caleb Whitcomb had altered years before. Clara looked at it and felt a bitter ache. Her father had changed water's path to win a war, and now that scar in the land might be the only thing that saved them. They dug like mad. Smoke blurred the sun. Ash clung to Clara's face. Her palms tore against the shovel handle, but she kept digging. Jonah worked beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, his breath rough behind the cloth over his mouth. Then his shovel struck something hard. He stopped. Clara turned. "What is it?" Jonah crouched and scraped dirt away with his gloved hand. A flat stone lay beneath the soil, too square to be natural. He pulled it free, and under it was a narrow wooden box, blackened by age but not burned. Amos, who had just reached them, froze. Clara saw his face. "You knew that was there," she said. Amos's voice came out thin. "I knew Caleb buried something near the ditch. I did not know where." Jonah lifted the box. It was sealed with rusted hinges and wrapped in oilcloth that had nearly rotted away. Before anyone could speak, the wind threw sparks across the ditch. "Later," Jonah said, shoving the box toward Clara, "dig." She tucked it beneath a damp sack near the ditch bank and went back to work. The fire reached the break line like a living thing. For a moment Clara thought they had failed. Flames licked through the weeds, snapped at loose grass, and crawled over the edge. Men shouted. Horses screamed in fear from the smoke. Jonah leapt across the ditch and beat at a burning patch with his coat. "Jonah!" Clara cried. He did not turn. A gust threw smoke over him, hiding him completely. Clara ran forward, but Amos grabbed her arm. "No!" She tore free. "Let go of me." She plunged into the gray haze, coughing, eyes burning, one hand stretched before her. Heat pressed against her face. She could hear Jonah somewhere ahead, coughing hard. Then her fingers caught cloth. She seized his sleeve and pulled. Jonah stumbled back through the smoke with his coat smoking at the hem. Together, they fell to their knees on the safe side of the ditch. Clara slapped sparks from his sleeve with shaking hands. "You fool," she gasped. He coughed once, then looked at her through soot and sweat. It stopped. Clara looked past him. The flames had reached the widened ditch and broken apart. On one side, black earth smoked. On the other, Clara's hay field still stood, dry and trembling in the wind, but alive. The men gave tired shouts. Some sank to the ground. Others leaned on shovels, too worn to cheer properly. Jonah looked at Clara's hands. They were scraped raw. "You came after me," he said quietly. She looked down, suddenly aware that she was still holding his sleeve. "I told you," she said, her voice rough. "I am not practiced at leaving people behind." His eyes held hers, and for a moment the smoke, the men, the feud, even the danger seemed far away. Then Ben called from near the first burn mark. "Mr. Reed, Miss Whitcomb, you both need to see this." Clara and Jonah rose. Ben stood where the fire had started, holding a broken lantern with black oil still wet inside the rim. Beside it, pressed clear in the dirt, was the mark of a horse's back left shoe. Uneven. Broken. Clara turned toward Amos, but he was staring at the buried box under the wet sack. The fire had been set, and whatever Caleb Whitcomb had hidden near the old ditch was now in Clara's hands. By sundown, the fire had become a black scar across the lower pasture. Smoke still rose in thin gray threads from the burned grass. The men moved slow now, faces dark with soot, shirts damp with sweat and creek water. Horses stood with heads low, too tired to stamp at flies. The smell of ash clung to everything. Clara sat on an overturned water barrel near the ditch, the wooden box resting on her knees. Jonah stood beside her, one hand wrapped in a wet cloth where a spark had kissed his skin. He had told her 3 times it was nothing. Clara had ignored him all 3 times and tied the cloth herself. Amos waited a few steps away, hat in hand, looking older than he had that morning. No one spoke for a while. The box had been buried deep beneath the old ditch, hidden under stone and earth, kept safe by the very scar Clara Whitcomb had cut into the land. It was not large. A man could hold it under one arm, but Clara felt as if the whole weight of the valley sat inside it. Jonah crouched beside her. "You do not have to open it here." "Yes," Clara said, "I do." Her voice sounded calm, but her fingers trembled when she touched the rusted latch. Jonah noticed. He did not touch her hand, he only stayed close. The latch broke with a dry snap. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, a small ledger, and a photograph browned at the edges. Clara lifted the photograph first. 4 people stood in front of the old creek bridge. Her mother, younger than Clara had ever seen her, eyes bright and mouth almost smiling. Nathaniel Reed stood beside her, one hand resting on the bridge rail, not touching her, yet somehow turned toward her. Near them were Clara Whitcomb and Amos Vale, both young men, both wearing the proud faces of men who thought the world would always bend to them. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, were the words, "Before the water turned bitter." Clara passed the photograph to Jonah. He stared at his father's face. I have never seen him look like this. How peaceful. Amos closed his eyes. Clara picked up the ledger. The cover was cracked, the pages swollen from age but readable. At first she saw numbers, cattle counts, payment notes, feed orders. Then Jonah turned a page and went still. There, written in Clara Whitcomb's hand, were payments made to 3 men for ditch labor on nights when no work had ever been recorded with the county. Below that were names. One of them was Crow. Not Sila's, but his uncle Martin Crow. Clara read the next line aloud, her voice thin. Payment for moving lower run of spring water west of original channel. The men around them seemed to fade. Jonah took the ledger carefully. This proves the water was moved. And that my father paid for it. Amos spoke at last. Caleb meant to keep Evelyn from ever having reason to cross that line again. Clara turned on him. He stole water because he was jealous. He told himself he was protecting what was his. My mother was not land. No, Amos said, and his voice cracked. She was not. Clara looked down at the ledger until the ink blurred. All her life, she had defended her father's name because it was the only shield she had in a county that wanted to see her fail. Now that name sat in front of her, written in his own hand beside a wrong he had buried under earth. Jonah turned another page. A folded paper slipped loose. He opened it and drew a slow breath. Clara. She looked up. It was an agreement, not filed with the court, not witnessed by a judge, but signed by Evelyn Whitcomb and Nathaniel Reed, with Amos Vale listed below as witness. The spring and its lower run shall remain open to both ranches in dry seasons, as it was before boundary changes. No herd shall be denied water when life depends upon it. Clara stared at Amos. You witnessed this. He nodded, shame heavy in his eyes. Why did you let it disappear? Because Caleb found it before Evelyn could take it to town. He raged for 2 days, said if it ever saw daylight, folks would know she had gone to Nathaniel for help. He said they would call her faithless, even if she had done nothing wrong. I was young, and Caleb was my friend, and I thought silence would spare her. Clara stood so quickly the box nearly fell. You spared no one. Her voice carried across the burned field. A few men looked over, then looked away. You let two families rot in hatred, she said. You let my mother carry blame that belonged to men. You let Jonah grow up under a lie. You let me point a shotgun at the only man in this valley who had a right to that water too. Amos took the words without defending himself. That made Clara angrier, then sadder. I know, he said. The sun lowered behind the ridge, turning the smoke copper. Jonah folded the agreement and placed it back in Clara's hands. This should go to Sheriff Danvers, he said. And the county judge, Clara answered. Amos lifted his head. Crow will not let that happen quietly. He already set a fire, Jonah said. Fire is only the beginning for a man cornered by paper. Clara looked across the blackened field toward the South Flats. Somewhere beyond that smoky horizon, Sela's crow was waiting to see whether fear had worked. It had not, but she knew men like him did not stop after one failed warning. That evening, Clara and Jonah rode to town together. They did not hide it. The ledger and agreement were wrapped in cloth and tucked inside Clara's saddlebag. Amos rode behind them, not as a guard, not as a friend, but as a man finally walking toward the truth he had run from for half his life. Red Willow was glowing with lamplight when they arrived. Faces turned as they passed the mercantile. A child stopped rolling a hoop. Two women on the boardwalk fell silent. Outside the saloon, Sela's crow leaned against a post, clean-shirted and smiling as if he had not spent the day anywhere near smoke. His eyes went first to Clara's saddlebag, then to Jonah, then to Amos. The smile thinned. Well, Sela's called. Looks like the fire brought enemies closer. Clara rained mercy to a stop. Jonah stopped beside her. The whole street seemed to lean in. If you believe truth can be stronger than fear, remember this moment, because one hidden paper is about to challenge every lie Red Willow has lived under. Clara looked Sela straight in the eye. The fire did more than that, she said. It uncovered what you were afraid we would find. Sela's face did not change much, but his hand tightened on the porch rail. Before Clara could ride on to the sheriff's office, the door behind Sela's opened. Sheriff Danvers stepped out slowly. In his hand was Clara's mother's blue ribbon, and his face carried the look of a man who already knew someone had stolen the most important proof before Clara ever reached town. Clara stared at the blue ribbon in Sheriff Danvers's hand, and for one terrible breath, all the noise on Main Street faded. That ribbon had been tied around her mother's letter that morning. Clara had placed the letter inside her coat before the fire, close enough to feel it move when she breathed. After the ride to town, after the smoke, after the buried box, she had not checked for it. Her hand flew to her coat. The pocket was empty. Jonah saw her face change. Clara. She searched again, though she already knew. Her fingers found only dust, a torn thread, and the place where the letter had been. Sheriff Danvers came down the steps slowly. He was a narrow man with a gray mustache and kind eyes that had seen too many lies told in confident voices. He held the ribbon gently, not like evidence, but like something that had belonged to the dead. A boy brought this to my office an hour ago, he said. Said he found it near the alley behind the bank. Clara's voice was barely there. Where is the letter? Danvers looked past her toward Sela's crow. Sela's had not moved from the saloon porch, but the smile had left his face. In its place sat a careful blankness. That is what I was hoping you could tell me, the sheriff said. Jonah's hand tightened on his reins. Someone took it from her. Amos dismounted behind them, his face pale beneath the road dust. It must have happened during the fire. Clara turned on him. You were near me. Amos took the blow without flinching. I was, but I did not take it. The old Clara might have accused him until he broke. She might have let years of bitterness choose the truth for her, but the day had changed too much. She looked into Amos's tired eyes and saw shame, yes, but not theft. Jonah dismounted and stepped between Clara and the street, not blocking her, only standing near enough that she would know she was not alone. Sheriff Danvers lifted his voice. "Miss Whitcomb, Mr. Reed, you said the fire uncovered proof." Clara swallowed hard. "It did." Silas laughed once from the porch. "Proof of what? A woman with a burned pasture and a reed whispering in her ear can make proof out of anything." Clara untied her saddlebag with slow hands. Her fingers hurt from digging the fire line, but she would not let them shake now. She pulled out the ledger first, then the agreement signed by Evelyn Whitcomb and Nathaniel Reed. The street grew silent as she placed them in the sheriff's hands. Danvers opened the ledger under the light spilling from his office window. His eyes moved across Caleb Whitcomb's old writing, the payments, the names, the note about moving the Springs lower run. Then he read the agreement. His face grew grave. Silas stepped off the porch. "That paper is worthless, not filed, not stamped, could have been written by anyone." "It has Amos Vale's witness mark," Jonah said. All eyes turned to Amos. For the first time in many years, Amos Vale stood in the middle of Red Willow with nothing to hide behind. No loud voice, no old loyalty, no dead friend's shadow. He removed his hat. "I witnessed it," he said. "Evelyn Whitcomb and Nathaniel Reed signed that agreement before the feud hardened. The Springs lower run was meant to serve both ranches in dry seasons. Caleb Whitcomb buried the truth, and I helped silence it." A murmur passed through the crowd. Silas's eyes sharpened. Convenient confession from a man trying to save his own hide. Amos looked at him. "Your uncle was paid to alter the ditch." "My uncle is dead." "So are half the men who started this misery," Amos said. "Death does not clean a dirty deed." The words landed hard. Sheriff Danvers folded the agreement with care. "This goes before Judge Marlowe tomorrow morning." Silas's jaw flexed. "And until then?" "Until then, it stays in my safe." "No," Clara said. Danvers looked at her. Clara stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Sheriff, I mean no disrespect, but my mother's letter vanished before I reached your office. Someone knew what I carried. Someone knew where to watch. If these papers sit in one room tonight, they may disappear too." Jonah nodded. "Make copies now. Have witnesses sign that they saw the originals." Danvers studied him, then Clara. "That is sensible." Silas spat into the dust. "This whole town has gone mad." "No," Clara said, turning to him. "This town has been asleep." For the first time, Silas's mask slipped. Anger burned through. "You think this makes you safe," he said. "A paper will not mend your fences. It will not feed your cattle. It will not make men forget what your father was." Clara felt the strike of that last line, but it did not break her. "No," she answered, "it will not, but it may help me stop becoming him." A hush followed. Jonah looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw something deeper than admiration. He saw the cost of her words. He saw the daughter who had loved her father and still chose truth over his pride. Danvers called 2 deputies, then sent for Mr. Haskins, the schoolteacher, and Reverend Pike to witness the papers. Lamps were lit inside the sheriff's office. Clara, Jonah, and Amos went in together while the crowd lingered outside, whispering under the darkening sky. For the next hour, the papers were read, copied, and signed. Amos gave his statement. Ben arrived with 2 riders and swore to the broken lantern and the uneven hoof mark. A Whitcomb hand named Luke confirmed the same shoe print near the first burn mark. When Silas Crow's name was spoken, he was no longer on the porch. By the time Danvers stepped outside to look for him, Silas was gone. So was his gray gelding. Clara stood in the doorway, exhausted to the bone, watching the empty hitching rail sway in the evening wind. Somewhere down the street, A loose shutter tapped against a wall. The sound reminded her of the tied-open gate at the spring. Jonah came to stand beside her. "He will run to the South Flats," he said. "Or to the county road. Danvers will send men." Clara nodded, but her eyes stayed on the dark street. "My mother's letter is still gone." Jonah's voice softened. "We will find it." She looked at him. "You keep saying we." "I mean it every time." Before Clara could answer, a small figure stepped out from the alley behind the bank. It was a boy of maybe 12, barefoot, with soot on his cheek and fear in his eyes. He held a folded paper in both hands. "I did not know it was hers," he whispered. "Mr. Crow paid me to take it, but I read the first line and I got scared." Clara could not move. The boy held out the letter. And from the darkness beyond him came the sound of a rifle being cocked. The sound of that rifle lock froze the whole alley. The boy stood between the bank wall and the sheriff's office, holding Evelyn Whitcomb's letter in both hands. His bare feet were planted in the dust, but his knees shook so hard Clara could see it from the doorway. Jonah moved first, not fast enough to frighten the boy, but enough to place himself half in front of Clara. Sheriff Danvers lifted his hand. "Crow, do not make this worse." Silas Crow stepped from the dark beside the freight shed. His gray gelding waited behind him, reins loose, saddle packed. The rifle was in his hands, but it was not pointed steady. His face looked pale and wild in the lantern light. "That paper belongs to no one," Silas said. Clara's voice came clear, though her heart was hammering. "It belonged to my mother. It belongs in the ground with the rest of this valley's foolishness." Jonah took one slow step forward. "Lower it, Silas." Silas laughed, but there was fear inside it. "You think you won because an old ledger turned up. You think folks will clap for you when water rights change hands. Men have lost land for less." "No one is taking your land tonight," Clara said. "You tried to take mine." Silas's eyes flashed. "Your father took first." The word struck the street like a match. For one moment, nobody spoke. Then Clara stepped past Jonah before he could stop her. She did not walk close to Silas. She only moved into the lantern glow where he could see her face. "Yes," she said softly, "he did." Jonah turned toward her, surprised. Clara's eyes were wet, but she did not look away from Silas. "My father did wrong. He let hurt turn him cruel. I loved him, and that is still true, but love does not make a lie holy." Silas's grip tightened on the rifle. "That confession will bury you," he said. "No," Clara answered, "it will free me." The boy took that moment to run. He darted behind Jonah and thrust the letter into Clara's hands. Silas jerked the rifle up, but Sheriff Danvers and Amos moved together. Danvers caught the barrel and forced it toward the dirt. Amos grabbed Silas from behind with the last strength left in his old arms. The rifle struck the ground with a hard thud, unfired. Two deputies rushed in from the side street. Silas fought for a breath, then sagged as they took hold of him. His hat fell into the dust. No one picked it up. Sheriff Danvers looked at him with deep disappointment. "Silas Crow, you are under arrest for setting fire to the lower pasture, threatening witnesses, and stealing evidence." Silas said nothing. His eyes stayed on Clara, not with victory now, but with the bitterness of a man who had watched fear fail him. As the deputies led him away, the whole town seemed to breathe again. Clara looked down at the letter in her hands. The blue ribbon was gone, but the paper was still there, worn and creased and warm from the boy's fearful grip. She opened it beneath the lantern. Jonah stood close, but he did not read over her shoulder until she tilted the page toward him. The final lines were written in Evelyn's careful hand. "Clara, my dear child, do not spend your life guarding a wound that was never yours. If the day comes when you must choose between pride and mercy, choose mercy. If you stand beside that spring with a reed, remember that water is not made smaller by being shared. Neither is the heart. Clara covered her mouth with one hand. All the strength she had carried through fire, fear, and truth finally bent inside her. Jonah reached for her, then stopped, unsure if he had the right. Clara gave him the answer by leaning into him. He held her gently in the middle of Main Street while the people of Red Willow watched in silence. No one cheered. No one mocked. It was too honest for that. Even Amos Vale turned away, wiping his eyes with a shaking hand. The next morning, Judge Marlowe read the papers in the courthouse. The ledger proved the ditch had been altered. The agreement proved the spring had once been meant for both ranches in dry seasons. Amos gave his full confession. The school teacher and Reverend Pike witnessed every word. Silas Crow's own hired man, frightened by the arrest, admitted to carrying the broken lantern to the boundary under Silas's orders. Justice did not come with shouting. It came with ink, testimony, and the quiet sound of old lies losing their power. By week's end, the court ordered the lower channel restored. The spring would remain on Reed land, but its overflow would again run where nature first sent it, down toward both pastures. Clara did not win everything. Jonah did not lose everything. That was why it felt fair. When the first restored water slipped through the old ditch, half the town came to watch. Clara stood on one bank. Jonah stood on the other. Between them, clear water moved over fresh-cut earth, carrying bits of grass and sunlight with it. Amos approached Clara that day with his hat in his hands. "I cannot undo what I kept buried," he said. "No," Clara answered, "but you can stop burying things." He nodded, eyes low. From then on, Amos spent his mornings helping rebuild the burned fence and his evenings giving statements for the county record, making sure no child in Red Willow would inherit the same lie again. Autumn came softly. The hay field survived. The cattle grew steadier. The peach trees at the Reed house gave a small late harvest, and Jonah brought Clara a basket without pretending the tree had forced him to. She laughed when he set it on her porch. This time, she invited him in before he could ask. They did not rush their hearts. They had both been raised under names that carried too much weight. But day by day, cup by cup, ride by ride, they learned how to speak without armor. Clara told him about her mother's songs. Jonah told her how lonely the orchard felt in bloom. Sometimes they argued over ranch work, and sometimes they stood at the spring without saying anything at all. By winter, the broken gate was replaced with a new one. Not locked. Never locked. On the first morning after snow dusted the hills, Jonah found Clara there, tying Evelyn's blue ribbon around the top rail. The cloth moved lightly in the cold wind. "My mother said the heart is not made smaller by being shared," Clara said. Jonah stood beside her. She was right. Clara looked across the land that had once divided them. "So, what do we do now?" Jonah smiled, quiet and sure. "We keep the water running." Years later, people in Red Willow would speak of that summer as the season when fire uncovered truth, when a woman chose mercy over pride, and when a man stopped obeying a dead man's anger. They would say Clara Whitcomb broke a gate to save her cattle, but what she truly opened was a path out of hatred. And whenever the wind moved through the cottonwoods by the spring, the blue ribbon on the gate would flutter like a small promise still alive. If this story touched your heart, like it and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have had the courage to choose truth, even if it changed everything you were taught to believe?